The convention is that we learn to grow up by. The game we are taught to play is that there is a person called me in a body called my body who trots about and makes noises and looks out through eyes upon an alien, objective thing we call the world, or if we want to be a bit grander, call it the universe, which the thing called me in my body can go out and explore and make notes about and find this, that and the other, find a tortoise and make notes about the tortoise and drawings and so on. And the convention is that this tortoise is somehow not me, but it is some object independent of me, which I, in my body, have found it. And we also have a further convention that, well, depending what sort of people we are, if we're behaviorists, then we may not think this, but most of us think that actually the tortoise also sees life in much the same way. That it is a being that has my shell, my feet, my tail, and my head and my eyes, out of which I look out of the hole in the front of my shell, and I see objects, trees, big things walking about on 2 feet, and so on, which are different from me. And we think, the tortoise thinks, that. And so on, and so on, and so on, and so on. Now, if it were that supposing that this couldn't happen at all, supposing nothing like this could happen. Supposing there's only a hypothesis. Supposing that if there were a distinction, such as that, supposing if there were that, only supposing that if it could be, what would happen? Well, if one imagined, supposing one imagined, well, this is me, and that ain't me. Surprise, surprise, what ain't me is exactly the same shape, mirror image-wise, as what is me. Surprise, surprise. Come to this another way. Take it philosophically. Take it philosophically, scientifically. Scientifically, on the basis of there is an objective existence which we look out of our eyes and feel through our fingers and hear with our ears, etc., and taste with our tongue and smell with our nose and so on. And then we take it to ants. Now ants can see ultraviolet light which we can't see, and therefore the sky looks quite different to them. Take it to extreme. If there are beings with senses, none of which concurs with ours, how could they possibly see a world which concurs with ours? In other words, even if one considered it scientifically, the universe as seen appears according to the form of the senses through which it appears. Change the senses, the appearance of the universe changes. Ask a philosophical question and you get a philosophical answer. What, therefore, is the objective universe that is independent of these senses? On the verification hypothesis, there can be no such universe because it varies according to how it is seen, the sensory apparatus. Take this a little further, and we see that we have made a distinction which don't exist. We have distinguished the universe from the sensory apparatus. But since the universe changes according to changes in the sensory apparatus, we have not distinguished the universe from the sensory apparatus. Therefore, the universe and the sensory apparatus are one. How then does it appear that it is so solid and objective looking? Now the answer to this is a very long question which takes a lot of I don't think I can give it all in a very short time. Because it needs a whole series of remarkable tricks before it can be made to appear like this. But since, if there ain't no such thing, then any trick within the law of the form is possible. This happens to be one of the possible tricks. If there is no such universe, if there is only appearance, then appearance can appear any way it can. You only have to imagine it, and it is so.
Regardless of proof.
Proof is nothing to do, my dear sir, with the objective world. Proof is mathematical. Nothing in science can be proved. It can only be seen. It can only be seen. But where it comes, where it is coextensive with mathematics, is that, in fact, what is so in mathematics, the basis of what is so in mathematics is what can be seen. Theorem and theatre have the same root. They are the same word. It is the spectacle that we see. And the discipline of mathematics is to go to what is so simple and obvious that it can be seen by anyone. Without doubt it can be seen. And from this...
And turtle.
And
seen by turtle.
I don't know whether turtles see it. If they did, they have a different discipline whereby they communicated, and we don't talk with turtles. So I can't answer that because I have never spoken to a turtle. But I'm sure the turtles can see well, they can certainly contemplate reality. I don't know whether they need to see mathematical theorems. I don't know whether they play that game.
Yes, they carry the numbers on their back.
They do.
13 variations in the shells.
Well, I'm not sure.
A certain pattern. It's the second avatar of Vishnu, so that when you see the turtle, you're seeing it from a point at which the mythologists would name that god. They would name the god as the first avatar of Vishnu. Sees the cosmic turtle swimming in the sea. And things that run around on the back of the turtle.
Yeah.
But maybe not inside his head.
This is called Mayamatics.
Why so solid? Why is objective culture so solid? I'd like to think.
Well, it has to be, after all. Oh dear, you know, what we need is a 20-year course to get to that point. Could I pitch one of those?
Can't you say that any reality is real the moment you perceive it as real?
Well, reality means royalty. It's the same root. Real Madrid is Royal Madrid. And what is royalty? But what is universal? The form, the family, the kingdom.
Owner of the measure, the rex, the regulus.
Yes.
Raise the thing.
You said someone talking? You said two things. The motive precedes the distinction. And then later on you said that one has to determine the relevance. That in searching for a proof, you also have to determine its relevance.
You have to make a relevant construction, yeah.
But just personally, what process do you
How do I do it?
all these laws?
Just contemplate. Also, not just one also tries all sorts of ways to get familiar with the ground. Why it may take you 2 years to find a proof which can be exposed in 50 seconds, is that you get familiar with the ground. You try in so many ways it won't work, and you get and then you try, and then you realize trying is not going to help, and then one day you stop trying, and then almost certainly you find your way. Or seeing anything to be so, because I've been working in these second degree equations for 5 years at least, thoroughly familiar with how they worked and so on, and I hadn't seen what they were theoretically, and I was wondering whether to put them in chapter 11 or some other rather beautiful manifestation of the form whereby you break up the distinction and it turns into a Fibonacci series. If you imagine well, I won't go into that now. It's another thing altogether. In laws of form, there's only about 1/20th of the discoveries that were actually made during the research. There's enough for 20 books, mathematically. And I had to decide when writing it what I could afford to write and what I could afford to include. But the actual research done is over 20 times the area that appears in the book. And I wasn't quite sure whether to put in at this point, because the book had to be finished, and I wasn't quite sure whether to put in for this chapter this beautiful breaking up of the truth where you get the rainbow, which turns into a Fibonacci series. You break up white light and you get the colors. You break up truth and you get the Fibonacci.
Logarithmic growth spiral.
Yes,
Light,
yes,
I think.
yes.
Right.
And I decided in the end that it was more practical to put in the expressions which went into themselves, because we did have practical engineering uses for this, but I still wasn't. I still didn't recognize the theory, although I knew there was a perfectly good theory also by this time. See what it was. We've been using them, I rather like engineering with it. Made this thing for the British Railways, still not knowing the theory. And so I sat down to write chapter 11, and without thinking, I wrote down a title. I'm not sure what I was going to call it, but I wrote something without thinking, and then I had a look at it, and I found that what I had written was equations of the second degree. Now, I was not aware of writing this down. The moment I had written it, it was eureka. That is what it was. The moment I spoke of it to my brother and then to other mathematicians, yes, of course. Yes, of course. And then it was only a matter of an hour or so to go through and see the analogy, which I did on the blackboard. I think it was this morning. Yeah. To see the paradoxes and everything, all the same, all existent in the ordinary common arithmetical equations of the second degree. And this is what we were doing in the thrown-out theory of types. But the coming to the knowledge of what it is, since you did ask, not a universal but a personal question, how actually does this happen? It happened something like that. After 5 years of scratching one's head and saying, what on earth can these be? Well, nevertheless, let's find out more about them. And then it comes in a way that is quite unexpected, in a way really for which one can take no personal credit for at all.
Is the 5 years the method to get to the space where, I'm not using the word properly, the space from which all titles are? Or there was an implication in what you said that your familiarity with the ground was the prerequisite for your then stopping trying, and then out comes this thing, which is like a subliminal or a latent or something inherent in the analytic process, nothing more. Am I?
Well, first, no. I'll distinguish the proceedings. It goes very much like the education of the child. The child is born knowing it all, and it immediately has this bashed out of it because it doesn't. It's very, very disturbing for those who see it. And so it then learns the game. It learns the game that is played around it, and this with variance is much the same game in any culture, whether it's 1 million years ago or 10,000 years ago, or today in America, or today in England, or today in China, or wherever it might be. It's much the same game, with variations according to the particular culture pattern. And it has its original knowledge bashed out. This it must forget. Those of us who've gone back and remembered our birth and remembered what we knew and remembered the covenant we then made with those standing round our cradle, and the realization that we now had to forget this and live a life.
Excuse me, is the word know the proper word to use? Doesn't that imply a knower and an object that is known? Isn't you can say that the infant was being it all?
If you like, yes. I'm only using word because you see the language is no good for talking this way.
Yes.
We have to use these imperfect terms which are based on distinctions. And you're quite right.
Yeah.
It is not knowing. It is only in its interpretation knowing. It's like dreaming a funny dream. While the dream was going on, it wasn't that funny, but bring it out into the critical atmosphere of waking life. Now it appears funny. The child is it. Bring it out into this, and it remembers it as knowing it. Then, and this is the way it can talk about it.
But you can never get into knowing it. You can only get back into being it again. You can only know a segment or a...
Well, it's dual, you see, because going back from there is no enlightenment without unenlightenment.
Yes. There's no survival without unenlightenment, actually.
Well, I'll pass that one.
Okay.
The planted seed is always considered to have died in the earth. It's died, and then the plant happens.
Then the plant happens, yes. But you see, enlightenment is different for every form of culture, because every form of culture is a form of unenlightenment, and the enlightenment matches it. So the form of enlightenment for our culture matches our culture. It matches the way in which we have been unenlightened. Enlightenment by itself, there is no such thing.
No.
Just as there's no black without white.
There's no what?
There's no black without white. But to be enlightened, having been unenlightened, is not the same as having been unenlightened before.
As having been
unenlightened before, because one wasn't really unenlightened before.
You get another word, which is neither un nor an.
Or before you are neither enlightened nor unenlightened.
You're enlightened.
Yeah.
Then you become unenlightened,
Yes.
from which you have to be enlightened. That is not the same. You remember your original unenlightenment.
Your original lightened.
Yeah, or enlightenment, or whatever it might be. Yeah.
When one sees the light the first time from the embryological model, in the cosmic sea like a tortoise inside the womb, you see what?
What seems to happen neurologically is that somehow, as you go along through those 5 years, you distribute the thing, you get it split up into parts all over the place. And then what probably seems to occur is some new constellation, new way of getting it put together again occurs at that moment of enlightenment. It's some process of that sort.
Is there then a further mental change?
Oh, yeah.
After the 5 years and
Oh, sure.
then what happens?
Well, I don't know, but I just got it to that stage, you know.
Well,
Experiments have gone.
let's quickly go through the procedure therefore again. The covenant with the world the child rapidly has to take is right. I'm not allowed to know these things. The child can see straight through the minds of everybody standing around its bedroom, and knowing where their blocks are, and so on. And then suddenly it realizes that it must put on the same blocks, otherwise it will not be acceptable. There is a moment of sadness when this happens. Oh well, it's goodbye. For quite a long time. I don't know how long, but it's goodbye to what I knew. And hello world. And now, instead of it being able to teach us, because it sees that is wholly unfair, now it goes through the game of these people who know less, teaching it. And in order that they can have the game, and it can play it, it must pretend to know nothing, so that they can now pretend that they are bringing it up and educating it. And so it then has it goes through the various states, playing the game of looking at things and being surprised. Oh, look at that! See? Oh, and that's what's this called? And so on and so forth. And gets the whole proceedings of playing the game of there is an objective world which you can run around and look at and pick flowers and bring them back and say, look, that's all. It's when one gets very far with this game and begins to wonder what it's about and how it is that we do find something outside and that it does appear to have some structure and so on. Come back and base it on what we're doing, that we begin to see, if we begin to ask the question, well, what is there outside, we begin to realize that what is outside depends on what is inside, if actually we're making the distinction at all. So we have this thing here again. But now we have another question. We have many other questions. And I hope you'll forgive me for only briefly touch upon the sort of outline of how we get there. I mean, one of the questions which is of interest is why we appear to see the same things. Why does it appear? I can see the moon and you can see the moon, and so on. If you're a different shape from me, then you should see a different thing. Well, if you take it back far enough, we have this. In other words, from one mark, we have any number of identical marks. This is a process. Yeah. This actually, mathematically, this arrangement is still only one distinction. It has exactly the same rules as this one. Just let's have a look, see where you are. Outside, outside. Inside, inside. Making one crossing. Outside, outside. Inside, inside. Outside, outside. There is no difference mathematically between that and that. We make the same number of crossings within the same place. This is the inside, and this is the outside. In other words, we can form another demonstration or illustration of that is the same as this in the point where they condense, but even so, we can make it look like two. But insofar as you and I see the same mood, we do so because it is an illusion that we are separate. We are the same being. At the level, we only appear separate for the convenience of filling space. After all, I we're going to invent a space, we'll have to fill it up with something.
Parkinson's law.
Yes. And we've only a limited material to fill it with. Since space is only a pretense, the observer in filling space undergoes the pretense of multiplying himself and stationing himself, but two people are only like two eyes in one observer. The scientific universe, the objective form which we examine with telescopes and microscopes and talk about scientifically, is not the form which our individual differences distinguish. It is the form which our basic oneness, our multiplicity, condensed to one, actually sees. And that is the scientific objective universe, observed with the part of us which is identical for each of us. Hence, its apparent objectivity. And what is called unobjective in science is where we actually use our individual differences, where we say, well, that's rather different from that, and if in fact what we observe depends upon that, and so on. So, therefore, that's not an objective distinction. That is something which is a personal view. Yeah, of course, that is not what science is about.
Well, how would you react to the remark that what you've been saying is a system that used to be called subjective idealism, in which you have substituted the structure of the nervous system for the concept of mind?
Well, I haven't got onto the nervous system because the nervous system is an objective thing in science. It's one of the things that we observe as a constant in what is called a body, which is an extension into hypothetical space of hypothetical objects. I never have had this thing about brains and so on. I think even Shakespeare has it, inside my something brain or something, my teeming brain or something like this. I never have felt that my brain is of any particular importance any more than my kneecap.
Talking about the structure of the sense
So yeah.
You've been talking about the structure of the sense organs.
Yeah, but only illustratively, to bring us back to the fact that we've made a distinction between the world and ourselves. I went and played the science game to show that even in science, playing the science game, which is to say, the reality is thus. There is a distinct me with senses. There is an objective world with objects and light and things flashing about. And when I see that window there, it means because there is light coming through that window, focused through the lens of my eye onto my retina in certain patterns, which then go through nervous channels to the visual area of the brain, where it's all projected in a muddle and upside down, and and so on. The whole scientific story. The trouble with the whole scientific story is that it don't end because it leaves us no farther, it leaves us no wiser than we were before. Because at no point does it say, and here, this is why, that is how it appears. So that But if you play that game, as I was doing for the purpose of illustration, one still finds that operating philosophically and saying, suppose I change all my sensory organs, now the whole universe appears to change. I'm only doing this to show that even playing the science game, as whatever game we play, must lead us to the same place. Even playing the science game, we see that there is no distinction between us and the objective world, except one which we are pleased to make.
Can you tell us something about the Fibonacci development?
I think again, for the since not everybody here has a mathematical training, it's something that if I have the breath, I will do later with you and perhaps a number of other mathematicians. But it is to explain it to the people who are beautiful though it is, non-mathematically, it does involve some rather lengthy exposition before it is possible to deduce what I'm talking about.
Well, maybe another question that I had that wouldn't be too far. What's the definition of the accidental factorization?
Oh, I'm hoping you weren't going to ask me that, because it's a long time since I've done this. Again, it's something that I would...
As I recall, I think the Gödel's theorem basically says that in an algebra you don't have completeness and consistency.
No, not in an algebra. In the common algebra of numbers, you can't have both. You see, this is where so many people go wrong over it.
The result is no more general than from the common algebra of numbers.
No. For example, in this algebra, you do have completeness. I prove it, and consistency. I prove both. In laws of form, you'll find the proof of consistency, and in theorem 17, proof of completeness.
Okay, now does Gödel's theorem only apply to the algebra based on real numbers? That is, it's beyond the integral. It's a field, right?
Well, I can answer you technically on this.
The field of real numbers, where you've got multiplication, addition, and associativity.
The system at least as complex as arithmetic.
Yeah, well, I'm trying to find out where the boundaries are.
Yeah, it doesn't. In fact, it has interesting boundaries. Yes, this is a very common error among mathematically trained people. It does in fact apply all over. It doesn't. It's not applicable to the primary algebra, which is both consistent and complete. It is not applicable to working to a modulus, where algebraic factorizations are the only factorizations. Gödel's theorem doesn't apply. Working to a modulus is both consistent and complete. The ordinary algebra of numbers, not introducing the complete system, for example, the algebra of the positive and negative integers. Now Gödel's theorem applies, provided you use both constants, multiplication and addition. Doesn't apply otherwise, you just use one. The difficulty is that you've got two voids. You see, if you use both, you've got a void of 0 in addition. You've got a void of 1 in multiplication. The constant you put in it makes no difference. Interestingly enough, it doesn't apply to the complete number system.
Okay, so it applies in an integral domain, but it doesn't apply. It doesn't apply in a field.
In the whole, in a complete field, using a real and imaginary numbers, no.
Yeah.
Complex numbers doesn't apply. That's not generally known.
Okay, what if you've got,
Proved by task.
what if you got a field of just plain real numbers and not
Am
complex?
I stand to be corrected here, but I think it was proved by Tarski, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, what if you got just the field of real numbers, not including the complex numbers, does it apply?
Then I think it applies. Well, I'm not really very interested, but
Okay,
it doesn't.
now I think I'm beginning to get an idea of where the boundary is. Between the field on the field just including the real numbers, it applies, but when you go to the field of complex numbers, it doesn't.
It happens that way, yes. Yeah. But it's beautifully illustrated in cases working to a modulus, where you've no accidental factorizations. If you found the algebraic factorizations, you found them all. Whereas when you're not working to a modulus, working with the integers, you found the algebraic factorizations. You still haven't found them all. And the others are called the accidental factorization.